Well, so the lesson I took away from all of that is that even though things are very, very bad in Hong Kong, they can still get worse.
I kept thinking when Max was talking about the whole, the Chinese imperialism thing and all of this stuff, like people not realizing what's happening. I kept thinking about that quote from The Usual Suspects, where, I'm talking about Kevin Spacey's character.
Kaiser Sose.
He's like talking in the beginning.
No, don't spoil it, Matt.
Oh,
Oops.
We're gonna
that 30-year-old movie.
We're gonna talk. The whole quote about how like the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
Oh yeah, wasn't that from a Twilight Zone originally?
Maybe,
something?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I only saw it in The Usual Suspects. So
okay. Well, so what do you mean by that?
Well, the whole idea that we're at war with the Chinese Communist Party, they can just hide it, right? Like they're doing all this stuff to wage economic warfare, political warfare, all these things that we've been talking about for the last 8 years. And they're able to, at the same time, hide it. That it doesn't happen. It's not convince us it's not happening, and also somehow trigger a Pavlovian response in governments and media around the world to be afraid of angering China in case we get into a war. You know what I mean? Like the whole like weird, angering China thing, where like, oh well, we can't, like increase tensions.
Like, well, what would happen? What horrible, like, what are they imagining would happen?
Maybe they would,
get kicked out of China, their little businesses or their little newspapers and media companies get kicked out of China.
Yeah, that would never happen if we didn't make China mad. It's not like the New York Times isn't already kicked out of China.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but I mean, like NBC has their Olympic broadcast contract. They have an interest in maintaining, their relationship. So there's
all the sports teams.
There's a lot of, major U.S. companies that have these extremely strong, just like, Major League Baseball, right? I mean, they want to boycott Georgia because of the voting law, but like they're happy to have, set up shop with the MLB in China.
Or this whole like, literally the NBA had a basketball training camp in Xinjiang.
Yeah, I mean, I think they should boycott that because, the people in Xinjiang, aren't even allowed to vote if they show ID.
I think...
Yeah, just like Major League Baseball, you knocked that one right out of the ballpark.
The thing about it almost feels... I was going to say this sounds terrible, but it almost feels like what needs to happen is some, somebody who's like a high-ranking Wall Street official needs to get arrested in China.
Like just flat out arrested and tortured.
But at the same time, now I'm thinking maybe that wouldn't make any difference because that happened with an Australian, Stern Hu.
From Rio Tinto. Yeah.
Like back in the mid-2000s.
But the difference is, and this is horrible that this is the difference, but he was ethnically Chinese. And so like the sad truth is people just don't care as much, even though he was an Australian citizen. They're just like, oh, well, maybe like that's kind of okay-ish. Which it's not. And I think what we've seen with Canada and the Communist Party's detention and then later official arrest and charges against the two Michaels, right? Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. It's like, these are Canadians, but they're also white Canadians, so they look Canadian. And I think the issue now has become a much broader part of the public consciousness in Canada.
But it doesn't stop Canada from doing business with China. I mean, I'm not advocating for somebody to get arrested. I'm just saying.
But that's unfortunately
it's kind of like the thing we were talking about where like if it doesn't happen to you, you don't think it's going to happen ever, Yeah.
Don't worry. If a Wall Street executive is ever arrested in China, we'll be sure to make an episode about that and, call for his or her release. So
yeah,
we got their back.
I think that like it kind of doesn't matter anymore. Before, I thought that, if you were not Chinese, you would be safer in China.
It was true for a period of time, and now we're in this kind of area where it might not be so true anymore.
No, I don't think it's true anymore at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I definitely felt safe as a white person in China, in mainland, last time I was there. But it's just, but that was many years ago.
The U.S. State Department warned against travel in China, partially for coronavirus and partially because of politically motivated detentions. I believe that's still the case. I don't think they've removed that.
No, I don't think so. Now you did they add possibility of getting anal swab to that travel warning?
Well, I mean, that's a pro, depending on how you.
Okay, we should.
No, but the point is that like you can be arrested arbitrarily, and because of the way Chinese laws are written, they can actually detain you first and then decide later what the charges are going to be. Like there's no like you don't have to have committed a crime first. They can always figure that out later.
Yeah, after they've tortured you to
And get you
get
to
some kind
confess.
of confession from you, then they can make it up.
And if you don't confess, they'll do what they've done to some people is they basically take their denial of things, but like edit it together in a video as if it's a confession to something.
Or they'll drug you into a confession, as like they drug Peter Humphrey.
Right.
I mean,
Well, no,
it's-
but I'm talking about Peter Humphrey because like he never actually confessed to things, but they selectively edited that and then made it seem as if he was confessing, which he is adamant that he did not.
And all of these things have already happened. We're getting to the point where the Chinese Communist Party will be able to act with impunity if we don't stop them now. We're losing our ability to stop the Communist Party.
and they're going to be able to act with impunity, not just within China's borders, which is the current case, but around the world, places where the Belt and Road are. Like,
They're already doing it in many of these developing countries, acting with impunity, even though it's upsetting, like Cambodia,
all right, I was just thinking about that.
right? Like
yeah.
like the Communist Party is like gambling, for example, is illegal in Cambodia for Cambodians, but like because of collusion with the Cambodian president, they've set up like a whole like gambling town in Sihanoukville, and we did an episode about that on China Uncensored, where like they're bringing all these Chinese people and Chinese money and Chinese things, and then like it's having a huge negative impact on
Isn't it
the
essentially
locals.
run by the Chinese mafia?
Oh yeah,
at this point,
yeah. No, I mean the mafia. I mean it's a totally private mafia.
Ah,
Ask
Right.
Hong Hongers about that. They
Yeah.
talked about how the triads are connected to
all
the party.
connected.
Yeah, I mean, and we haven't talked a whole lot about that on our show, but like a lot of the times, the Communist Party will conduct its operations not just through private companies, but actually through triads and other
The underworld.
underworld type criminal organizations that are also carrying out the party's agenda. But I think that makes sense because that China was taken over by a group of gangsters in 1949. So like it's essentially that same idea, that same mentality that's permeated that whole time. So it's actually probably easier to work with gangsters than to work with companies.
Well, what's the difference?
Ooh.
Yeah. Well, Matt, China has never invaded another country.
The
Did you know-
first
and-
thing they did was invade Tibet.
No.
Then they tried to invade Taiwan, but the U.S. stopped them.
Oh, you're talking about no. They've never Tibet was part of China. I'm not in 5,000 years of history. They've never invaded. Seriously, that was actually something Hua Chunying said recently at a press conference. So they do this like whitewashing of Chinese history that's not at all accurate.
It would be great if she's saying that and just like, well, I guess it's in China. It's not in front of Western reporters, so it wouldn't happen. But I'm just imagining like a wave of all the reporters just tackling her. I know. We're done. But we're already seeing China trying its hand at sanctioning the Western world with H&M and Nike. All these Western brands that try to, say we're not going to use Xinjiang slave labor cotton.
Yeah, I mean, they've also sanctioned like
The EU
professors,
officials
yeah,
as
and
well.
EU officials and professors.
They're trying their hand out at it. And they're going to get to the point where Chinese sanctions could really hurt the West. Think about that.
But the advantage of that is, you mentioned earlier, like we don't see the problem until it happens to us. And so as the Communist Party starts to do these revenge sanctions against Westerners, Western elected officials, and Western companies, then like people in the West are like, wait a second, maybe this does affect us. Maybe the Chinese Communist Party really is this evil mafia-like organization that's
if only
destroying
there
us.
had been some show trying to warn us for a decade.
No, I think that they really. I mean, I think I welcome them doing this because it's great. You don't have to kind of look for examples of it happening.
It's honestly way more effective than China Uncensored.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
but like the whole like economic, like the whole like letting Australian lobsters die on the crates, on like, it's just like
their economic warfare.
Yeah,
against
I mean,
Australia.
but even Max was saying that even with all that, there's still
Look at the coronavirus.
Yeah.
I mean, how did they spin that to their advantage?
Chris, we need China's help to deal with the coronavirus. We need to follow their methods and we need to get their vaccine.
You
And
can't even talk about that the virus came from China.
I think, though, that they maybe have overstepped in that. 6 months ago, the idea that it may have come from a Chinese lab was not anything that you could talk about without being considered a
crazy.
conspiracy theorist, crazy person. But now we have open letters being published in the New York Times with people saying we need an investigation into the origins of this and whether it came from a lab.
yeah, to be clear, the issue is whether it accidentally leaked from a Chinese lab.
Not with some kind of bioweapon.
Right. And there's very few people saying that, but definitely the lab leak hypothesis.
It was still
Is-
treated like a crazy person thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, as I've long said, these kind of accidents can happen all the time when you have lax safety standards and lax enforcement. And we've seen them happen before in China with other things, so like SARS. So like, it's just not that far out of the realm of possibility that, people just made a mistake. And, as I always say, never underestimate the power of human incompetence.
Well, I mean, take a look at who was arguing against the lab leak hypothesis at the beginning, like WHO experts like Peter Daszak, who turns out to have close working relationships with the lab that may have leaked the virus.
Just wait till the Chinese Communist Party, sanctions him over something, and then
Well, he already.
just tune.
I mean, I think it took a year of the Chinese Communist Party trying to convince people that it came from all these other countries, and also maybe like frozen food or German auto parts. Like they had to kind of, or the U.S. military. Like I kept kind of having to get bigger, and then they kept having, and then the whole like restricting the WHO report and this. So they had to. It took like a year of them doing all of this stuff before people were able to publicly say things like,
Wait a minute.
"Yes, there's
What if
something
they're
weird."
lying?
Yeah. So I mean. We have to keep up the pressure, and then we have to like let the Communist Party keep making that mistake.